So welcome everyone to today's webinar on retiring the focus group and using text analytics for advanced qualitative research. So I'm Satoshi Asari. I head up product and customer experience here at Luminoso. At Luminoso, we help our customers surface insights from unstructured text data with our domain agnostic AI, which is capable of really understanding natural language, as you know, in the text data to analyze. All right, so without further ado, I'm very excited to be joined by Jim White today, founder and president of RealityCheck. RealityCheck is a full-service market research firm and a pioneer in the area of qualitative research. So welcome, Jim. Thank you very much for joining. And if you want to sort of introduce yourself a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Satoshi. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's in attendance here. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Hopefully this topic is as interesting to you as it has been for me over the last several years. Yeah, pioneer, I don't know about that. It's just because we've been doing it for so long. Maybe that's why I feel like a pioneer. Yeah, so RealityCheck is a full service market research company, so we do qualitative, quantitative analysis, fully integrated studies, but we really got started, way back in the early 2000s as primarily a qualitative research shop. So, qual research is something I'm very passionate about. I've been doing it a while. I've probably personally moderated thousands of focus groups. It seems like millions at this point in my career, but I've been doing it for a long time, which brings us to the topic for today, right, Satoshi?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's exactly why we invited you to have to talk about retiring the focus group. And so I think throughout the next half hour or so we'll cover some pros and cons of using focus groups. Because as there's certainly a place for a focus group as well, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about the challenges some research teams, businesses, are facing in adopting some of these new, methods and technologies. And then we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on where you think this is all going. Right. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have some time set aside at the end for Q&A. So hopefully, we'll get some good questions from the audience that we can tackle at the end as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it, right? So in the so we use the word advanced qualitative research in the title of the webinar. So so what does that mean to you, and how is that different, or or how does that complement traditional focus groups?
Yeah, when we talk about advanced qualitative research at RealityCheck, we're really talking about leveraging technology for qualitative data collection and analysis that allows us to be, delivering sort of rich qualitative insights, but also insights that are valid, that are robust, that are reliable, in the same sense that you might think about quantitative analysis being valid and reliable. So we have all of these technological tools that are available to us today that weren't around when I first started in this business and we were doing qualitative research kind of back in the day. And now we have these tools that really allow us to, I think, elevate the credibility of qualitative research. And I know we'll talk about this in a minute. I think there is a place for the focus group still in our world. But when it comes to actually doing data-driven market research, when you need reliability, when you want projectability, there are tools now that I think can elevate the credibility of qual that we can leverage. And so when we talk about advanced qualitative, we're talking about using some of these tools that are now available to us to do research in ways that we just never had access to in the past. So that's what we mean by a very kind of high level description of the term.
Okay, but I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, there are pros, or there are times or places where focus groups still make sense, right?
Yeah, yeah,
A good
yeah,
way
yeah.
to.
Absolutely. There are pros and cons, and I apologize to those in attendance. I mean, we did kind of, we wanted the title of the webinar to be provocative, right? And I do believe that we should retire the focus group in some areas, but it's still relevant, I think, in other areas of the methodology. But when we talk about focus groups, by the way, I'm talking about both the old school in-person at a research facility focus group, as well as the digital focus group, which is now important. I think that the pros and cons of both of those are the same. It doesn't matter if it's in a digital space or if it's face-to-face, or frankly, if it's a bulletin board type interaction, which is now popular these days. Any of those type of group methodologies, I think, have the same benefits and the same potential pitfalls. So you're right. What are the benefits? Well, I think groups are still great when you want to, at the very early stages of a research project, you really don't even know what questions to ask, and you're just getting your feet wet. So that very early exploratory phase, which isn't really research, you're basically doing focus groups in order to get immersed in a topic so you can design the real study in the first place. That's one example of where I think focus groups still have benefit. I think secondly, if you're looking to build team empathy, you want your team exposed to the consumer just to hear them talk. I think groups are a great way to do that. It's almost like a team offsite with the consumer. And then, finally, I think that focus groups can still be great for inspiration. My business partners and I have often talked about, the one respondent sitting in the back of the room who says something that triggers an idea, and that's valid as well. The cons, though, is that, and where I don't see focus groups as relevant today because we have other alternatives that technology is affording us, is when you need valid market research. If you're testing concepts, if you're looking for the motivations of why people make choices in a product or service category, you want to understand those drivers of choice. You want to understand perceptions of your brand on a broad basis. That's where I believe we have better options now than the focus group, and that's simply because focus groups are error prone. The analysis can be highly subjective, and the interpretation of what happens in a group can vary. The whole idea of reliability in research is consistency of learning, right? So if you were to conduct the same project twice, would you get to the same place? And the problem with focus groups and the way they evolve because of group biases is simply prone to a lack of reliability. One-to-one interactions are a much stronger form of data collection if you're going to be conducting real research. And now we have ways to collect data on a one-to-one basis that tee up the use of text analytics like Luminoso offers in ways that just simply weren't available to us, back in the day. In many ways, and Satoshi, I've talked about this. Focus groups used to be the most efficient way to talk to a broad base of consumers, right? So, and then, their history goes back to the 50s and 60s, the Mad Men days, when you could assemble a group of consumers, you could talk to 30 or 40 or 50 consumers in a day without leaving an office. It was very efficient, very easy to do. And, in many ways, that sort of practice is still kind of how we do it now. But we have all these other tools that are available to us now that allow us to do qualitative research in ways that are much more efficient, but also rich, reliable, robust. And that's what we're trying to push toward. And that's what brought us to Luminoso a few years ago.
Great, yeah, that's very interesting. So it sounds like, you're saying that certainly focus groups were an important part of research in the past and could still be to some degree today, but but you've highlighted some limitations, right? Whether it be scale or consistency or reliability, the infusion of some biases and stuff like that into the results. So yeah, and it sounds like you're sort of taking your your research and your team sort of, down a path of, incorporating some of these other technologies and other methods. What what do you see maybe as potential? Did you face any barriers in trying to go down that path? And what barriers do you see potentially some other, counterparts to other research companies, or, businesses and enterprises that maybe have in-house research teams and things like that, sort of facing as they try to explore some of these possibilities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we built a digital qualitative data collection platform back in the early 2000s, because we were largely a focus group, in-person, old school qualitative company. And we really thought that we were going to be put out of business by the digital revolution. So lo and behold, so we built a platform back in the early 2000s, and that has since been spun off as a separate company. It's the primary platform that RealityCheck uses to this day. It's called AHA. It's a great data collection tool. But we built that out of fear because we thought, we're going to be out of business in 5 years. Nobody's going to be doing focus groups anymore. Well, it's still hanging on. It took really a global pandemic, I think, to push the bulk of qualitative market research into a digital space. But even then, we're still seeing a lot of requests for, online focus groups. So we get, the reluctance to let go of the tried and true, done for decades, is really, it's palpable, and I understand it. I think that when you ask about barriers, we've seen a couple of things. One is, market research studies are, they're important for our stakeholders, and you have an insights manager or director who is responsible for getting the insights that their team needs, and there's always risk in trying a new method. And everybody knows what a focus group is, everybody knows how it works, and there's comfort in that. So I think there's just a risk aversion, and that causes a lack of willingness to try something new. I think that's one barrier. I think another barrier is that, there has been a lot of trial. And this is a fledgling kind of company or category, conducting qualitative research a different way, collecting data through asynchronous online platforms, using AI text analytics to analyze unstructured data. These things are all in infant stages, even still. And I think a number of clients may have tried something like an online bulletin board, or have tried a text analytics package for analysis, and walked away from that experience not fully satisfied. Like, they felt like, well, this is thin. I didn't get sort of the depth of learning that I got from the last round of focus groups I did. I know what that's about, so they don't go back. And I've heard that before. And I would just push back and say, well, you probably got the wrong partner. You need somebody who knows how to do this stuff the right way and to get robust, deep qualitative learnings out of it. So risk aversion to try new things, definitely. And then what I would call the once bitten, twice shy. Some folks have dipped their toe in these waters and haven't gotten what they wanted, and they've retreated back to the old ways of doing things. In my mind, those are the two biggest barriers to trying this. And advanced qual, as we call it.
Right. Yeah, and I think, in some of our conversations, you've talked about the need to, some of the advanced qualitative and the data that's sort of, most, useful for that kind of qualitative analysis doesn't just fall out, right? You talked about collecting the data. I think you've talked about sort of needing to design or structure the research to, with the forethought of including this kind of qualitative data and analysis, into the overall research framework.
Yeah. Well, let me just, I can describe for the folks listening in what we typically do and where Luminoso fits into that process, and then we could talk a little bit about what that requires from our team. But you're absolutely right. I think some folks who have gone down the path of trying text analytics and have been left cold, perhaps, I think are maybe approaching or having expectations that are a little bit beyond what the package, can actually deliver. The packages can actually deliver. You still need a trained analyst to do the analysis. I mean, AI text analytics platforms like Luminoso, we see that it's a tool that has to be incorporated into your workflow. You and I were talking about, it's like nobody expects a quantitative analysis platform to deliver insights. Nobody expects to push a button using SPSS and all of a sudden the answers pop out on the other end. No, you need a trained analyst working with the tool to extract insights and a depth of learning. You need a trained researcher to design the study in the first place to produce insights that are actionable and interesting and tied to the study objectives. But let me just back up for a minute. I mean, typically, when we do a study that involves text analytics, qualitative study, what we're doing is creating an asynchronous online experience. That's data collection. So, instead of being recruited to show up at a focus group facility or log into a live digital focus group interaction, respondents are logging into a platform and they're presented with a series of research tasks. They could be answering, simple open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, or they could be doing much more complicated projective tasks that are site-based, that might involve storytelling or guided imagery or creating collages or who knows what. There's about 1 million different discrete things that we can ask respondents to do that are all coming out of the world of clinical psychology and anthropology to sort of tap the way, what people's beliefs are, what their motivations are, all that. So I think the important thing to understand is that in our designs, the interaction is one-to-one. So we're eliminating that group bias. So respondents are logging into the platform individually. There might be a collaborative activity at one point, but that's not the engine that really drives this. It's a one-to-one interaction, but it's producing unstructured data. It's producing text, and that's what we want. We want language, because language for us is sort of the pathway into non-conscious beliefs and motivations, and that's what we're looking for, language. And that one-to-one interaction in an asynchronous platform, it not only reduces the bias of groupthink and group interaction, but it also tees up analysis in AI text analytics packages like Luminoso, because now, for the methodologist on the call, you've now got a respondent who's a case, right? Well, that gets really murky in a group setting. If you've got 8 or 10 individuals all talking in a focus group, teasing out that unit of analysis for rigorous, robust analytical work becomes really difficult. And that's why focus groups are prone to, what Dan Kahneman has recently called noise. It's random scatter error. And that to me is the fundamental problem when you're using groups as a research tool. So we are able to efficiently capture qualitative data on a one-to-one basis. We're able to do all the deep projective kind of stuff that we would do in a focus group or a live interview setting, but we're capturing it asynchronously, and that really creates efficiencies. So now, we can capture deep qualitative data on a typical qualitative sample of 30 or 40 people. We can also do it with a couple of hundred people. So now it gets interesting. Now we're talking about the prospect of qualitative research being projectable. Okay, that's kind of cool. Back in the day, and I've heard this a million times because I spent my career in qualitative, qualitative was always described mostly by most people as kind of quantitative research, kid brother, right? It's it's preliminary, it's exploratory, but the real answer's not in, the real verdict's not in until we do the quant. Well, what I'm really intrigued about now, by our ability to capture unstructured data, qualitative data, in ways that tee up the use of advanced analytical tools like Luminoso for analysis. Now we can do qualitative at scale. That's really interesting, because now we're talking about not only understanding the validity of the qual data set we have and our insights about that data set, but now we can get into projectability. Now we can compete with our quantitative brethren in a way that says, hey, we've got qual results here, and they're just as projectable as anything else. So we recruit people standard, qualitative recruiting specifications, but instead of showing up for a group discussion, they're logging into an asynchronous platform. And then, we have a team of analysts who have fit Luminoso's platform into their workflow, and we can design research tasks that gives us the kind of data that we can analyze using text analytics. And they go to work finding those, deep, rich, still human insights based on the language that we're capturing, an unstructured language, using the AI text analytics tool. So I think what I'm really excited about, and hopefully my excitement's coming through, I think this is just, it's such a cool area to be in these days, is the ability to understand what's happening with a sample of respondents with more validity, more depth, things that the human eye couldn't catch alone without a tool like a text analytics tool, but then also the ability to now do qual at scale. I think those two things are really, really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, that's, that fits perfectly with sort of, what our mission is, at Luminoso, is to enable, this kind of discovery and qualitative text analytics at scale, right? I mean, as you're doing the data collection, what kinds of things do you think about, or what should people be thinking about, as they formulate those questions to gather that data, right? Because so you can, no matter what tool you use, you can't find insights that are not present in the data. So I think it's important to collect data that contains the insights, right, or the pieces, that lead to the insights. So
yeah, I think that's a great question, and the important thing that this it's important to understand about this type of qualitative research is that it is more akin to quant approaches when you think about study design, because you really do have to begin with the end in mind. You do have to think about your analysis plan, I think much more so than perhaps a lot of qualitative practitioners are used to, because when you're doing qualitative work, particularly something like focus groups, it can be very exploratory and open-ended. In fact, one of the benefits I think of traditional qualitative research is that it can evolve over the course of a series of focus groups. The last group could be totally different than the first one that you conducted, because as you hear and begin to pursue themes and trends that emerge, you're going to evolve that discussion as it goes. You can't do that as much with an asynchronous research approach. You've got to design those activities. They've got to be put in place. They've got to be right, just like a questionnaire almost. So it puts more pressure on smart research design, in the same way that you would never embark on a survey research project without knowing what kind of analytical approaches you're going to use on the back end. So we know when we design a study, to use some Luminoso language, we know if this is going to involve a drivers analysis. We know if we're going to be using the Galaxy tool as part of this, and we design the activities to produce the data we need to analyze it that way. So you're absolutely right. It does impact how you think through design, and really it's that simple. It goes back to the simple best practices of any kind of research endeavor, which is begin with the end in mind. Know how your analysis is going to play out before you start and design to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we've sort of talked about where things have come from in terms of qualitative, research. And, and you mentioned, for better or for worse, the pandemic sort of having accelerated certain aspects of change, right? And certainly from our end, we know that, AI and machine learning
Yeah.
and things like that, as it relates to text analytics and other sort of analytics tools, are continuously, being innovated on and advancing. So sort of in that context, like, where do you see all of this going? Like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what do you expect sort of the market research, or just research more in general, to be looking like, and how sort of quant and qual kind of live side by side?
Well, I mean, we're assuming there's going to be, I think some in-person focus group work will come back. In fact, it's already starting to. We're seeing. In fact, I was working on a proposal right before this call that would involve group conversations, and that live work, I think, is still important. As we talked about earlier, there's a place for the focus group. And one thing I want to make clear is, my big bugaboo with either digital or live focus groups is that group piece, because it doesn't produce the kind of data at scale that we can use a tool like Luminoso to analyze. I still am a fan of live individual interviews. I'm still a fan of live ethnographic work. But again, there you're dealing with methodologies that allow for a single respondent to be a single case. You don't have the noise and bias that's present in group interaction, and that's really my main problem. And when you have any kind of textual data that's been generated from an individual encounter, whether that's asynchronous, whether it's a live interview, whether it's a live ethnographic encounter. If you've produced textual data like that and it's one-to-one, then you can use technology like Luminoso and other tools that we use. We use other AI-driven coding software that helps our analysts code efficiently. That's all in play. It's much harder to put that in play when you're doing group interactions, because you simply can't untangle the unit of analysis, so to speak. But to answer your question, I think that some in-person will come back. The balance between what gets done digitally and what gets done in the old kind of school focus group way, who knows how that'll shake out. I'm hoping that we've now seen sort of a sea change, that many research buyers now understand all that can be accomplished through asynchronous qualitative research, AI text analytics, realize the efficiencies that you can gain there, and the benefits of reduced error, more reliability, more consistency in findings, which allows stakeholders just to act with more confidence. You can now do a qualitative study and come out of it with a greater deal of certainty about what you've learned, rather than the subjective characteristics that qual has been known for in the past. So I think that that's one thing. I'm increasingly intrigued, though, by one of the things that you all, Luminoso, know quite a bit about, and that is analyzing unstructured data at scale, whether it's captured from custom market research like we do, with 30 or 40 or 100 respondents, or it's captured in the tens of thousands of cases from social media or digital reviews or what have you. Either way, I'm fascinated now by the prospect that we can analyze and get our arms around large unstructured data sets, because there's a lot of unstructured data out there these days, and analyze it efficiently with depth, using the new AI enabled software platforms that are available to us. I mean, that to me is really exciting. And I know we're getting a time here. We want to take questions, so I don't want to wrap up. But what I think is really interesting about this as a methodologist is it begins to break down the barriers between qualitative and quantitative. And that's what's really interesting. Like that old distinction we have of qual and quant, which I think is meaningful on some levels, but I like the idea of really not knowing if that distinction is no longer relevant. If we're doing qualitative research at quantitative scale, that to me is fascinating. And and I've talked about the quantification of qualitative data. But yeah, so that to me is where the future is taking us, and just kind of tearing apart those old distinctions and forge a kind of a new way to think about market research.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, you made at the end. I mean, I think we've certainly read various articles and reports and whatever by industry analysts where they point to unstructured text as one of the most growing and underleveraged assets that a lot of businesses have. So hopefully with the help of companies like yours, more businesses will figure out how to take advantage of those. So
yeah, there was one report that I saw from last year. It was a survey of market research buyers and market research suppliers, and the respondents were asked, what new methodology are you most interested in this year? And text analytics was #1 on the list. I think something like, of that sample, 70% of market research buyers said text analytics was among the methodologies that they were most curious about. The interesting thing for me as a supplier was that text analytics was pretty low down on the supplier list, which to me, that's an opportunity. That's a gap. If there's high interest among market research buyers in text analytics and not a whole lot of suppliers out there providing it, well, that's important for RealityCheck to be in that space. Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, so it does definitely seem like we're really just scratching the surface with some of this stuff and the value that qualitative research can bring. So thank you very much, Jim, for some of the great insights and stories. So your methods of this asynchronous data collection seems to, it's almost like you saw the future or something 20 years ago. I do believe we have some questions from the audience. So I'm going to have Kim Larson, who's one of our senior client success managers who've been listening in and curating the questions, join. And, hopefully we can answer some of these questions, Jim.
Yeah, we got some good ones lined up. Thank you, Jim and Satoshi, for hosting the core content. Jim, are you ready for questions? They're mostly
yeah. I'll do my best.
All right, so the first one from the audience is it possible to share any examples of companies that have jettisoned focus groups? I believe a specific brand may have moved away from focus groups.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can tell you who we work with, and whether they've jettisoned or not, I have no idea. But because we do the projects that they throw our way, but we do a lot of work for Nestle. We do a lot of work for Purina within that sort of Nestle world. US Bank is a big client of ours. Anthem Healthcare, which is now Elevance. And we are doing for all of those clients. Quite a bit of asynchronous online qualitative. We are still doing, quite a bit of one-on-one interviews digitally for them. Whether they've moved away from group interaction, they might be using other suppliers for that. I honestly don't know, but I do know that all of these clients are embracing digital approaches, and particularly are intrigued on the sort of analytical end. What can we do with qualitative analysis? And I think that one of the things that has always frustrated me ever since I started in this business. I mean, I came out of a classical social science market research degree program, right? So I'm trained as a research person. And, when I first entered the world of market research, I was shocked about how fast and loose the focus group process was and how subjective it was. The fact that we could do, 4 or 6 focus groups, have a debrief meeting, and then people were off to the races acting on that. And I was trained as sort of a rigorous methodologist, right? And it just surprised me. And I've always been a little bothered by that. And when I think that what clients are responding to with what Satoshi and I have been talking about is getting out of the subjectivity of qualitative interpretation. I mean, I don't know how many debriefs people have been in where you're in the back room after focus groups and there's a disagreement about what was heard. Or there's confirmation bias. Somebody latches on to what one respondent said in one group, and that, dovetails with their perspective that they came in with. And I think, what we're talking about is a way to analyze qualitative data that overcomes that, because you can, as one of my favorite clients in this business, I won't name her name, but she once said to me, she loves it when you can show your work. And what this kind of analysis allows us to do is show our work, that we have analyzed every word that was contributed by every respondent in total. And so we know that what we are presenting to you is true for this data set. Like I've said many times, rich, reliable, robust, taking that bias, that noise, that subjectivity out of it. So the clients that are responding to that are the ones I think that appreciate that and want that level of confidence behind their qualitative insights.
I think that kind of segues to another question that we had, which more of a story than a sentence. So trademark Luminoso client. We have focus group moderators that are skilled at reading people and asking questions in a way that reduces bias already. I'm not looking to replace them as members of my team. What sort of learning curve might I expect in shifting my team from focus group moderation to more of this asynchronous centric workflow? And does this impact morale or employee satisfaction?
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot there. I mean, if you've got moderators on your team who are great, and again, I am one. I continue to be one. I mean, before I got into this field, I was a newspaper reporter. So I've been interviewing people qualitatively my entire life. It feels like, and I love that interaction, and I love the depth of empathic understanding of another human being. I would say that the first thing to do is migrate from groups to individual interviews. Yeah, that to me still requires skilled interviewers and people who understand how to connect with another human being. And then secondly, as we said at the outset, I mean, I do believe there's a place for focus groups. It's just rigorous research is not the place for it. But again, if you're looking to get immersed initially in a category or a topic you don't know much about, if you're looking for just sheer inspiration or empathic interaction between your team who are observing and your customers, I think groups are great for that. Or if you're just looking for that light bulb to go off, that one respondent who says something and you're like, that's a great idea. I've been in those groups, I've moderated those groups, and they're great. I think there's still a role. And a lot of what we're doing these days, is asynchronous data collection followed by a series of, a small number of one-to-one interviews, all done digitally. But that way we have this 1-2 punch of asynchronous data collection that tees up text analytics. But we've also got a series of 6 to 8 or 10, in-depth interviews the clients can observe. But because they're one-to-one interviews, we can also put those transcripts into an AI-driven coding package that allows our analysts to code those data really rigorously. So there's still no subjectivity around what was heard. We know what was heard. We've measured it. So I think that's how you keep your moderators engaged. And I think that most folks in this business that are curious and are interested in sort of what's coming next and pioneering new methodologies are usually intrigued by that.
Yeah, and I think that we have a different lens in the questions. Is there a cost differential between focus groups versus studies that use the advanced asynchronous approach? And how do I fit it within my current budget?
Well, usually it's the opposite. It's usually cheaper. It can range depending on the recruit and what you're asking respondents to do in the study. But typically, we found that an asynchronous approach allows you oftentimes to talk to more respondents more efficiently, both in terms of time and cost. So, imagine this. Let's say you're going to do a traditional focus group project. And that could be either digital or in person. I mean, in person, of course, you're flying to different markets. The field work has to be done linearly, right? Can't do them all at once, unless you could, but it's not optimal because most of the team wants to observe, right? That's the whole point. So, if you're doing 3 markets, that's 3 days in the field at least. It's a full day. Your team is on planes. They're flying to those markets. If it's digital, they're still logging in. They're expected to observe. Some of them are, some of them are not. You never really know if they're actually paying attention. And then from a consulting standpoint, I've got now a moderator who is spending a 6 to 8 hour day facilitating a series of 2-hour group discussions. Again, whether that's digital, if I'm flying them to markets, they're flying. So now let's say you've done 6 projects or 6 focus groups in that course of time over these markets. It's 3 days in the field, all day long, and maybe you've talked to 60 people. I can do a 3-activity asynchronous study, capture insights that are oftentimes more robust, deeper, analyze them more efficiently. And all of those respondents are logging in at times that are convenient for them. We're knocking out the field work. The clients are not on a plane. Our team's not on a plane. We have moderators who are dropping in and pinging respondents, encouraging them to go deeper. But I can have a team of people doing that rather than a single moderator. So everything is happening much more efficiently. And the other thing that's really interesting about this versus particularly live in-person focus groups is now we can recruit nationally or globally. So you can pull respondents from anywhere versus the study that I was just talking about, I was proposing on today, 3 markets, in-person work. We got to recruit from those 3 markets, which can sometimes drive expenses up depending on the incidence of respondents in those markets. If you can draw nationally, particularly when you're talking about low incidence groups, now all of a sudden recruiting becomes much easier. There's no travel costs associated with it. We are much more efficient in terms of data collection and analysis because technology is doing it for us. And yeah, so oftentimes asynchronous approaches are less expensive than the old school group approaches. So long answer to your question, but that's the rationale behind it.
And it adds a lot of color, and it ties in. We have 2 more questions left. Could be more if people go into the chat and into the questions section. Still keeping an eye on oh no, I have more questions. So rapid fire, Jim.
This is the speed round?
This is the speed round. Signs of a good webinar. We have a brief examples of an asynchronous research. If they're used to doing focus groups within a company across various departments about an upcoming benefit announcement, what would an exercise around that look like? Because we have some voice in the employee HR folks chiming in from our last webinar.
Oh, okay. All right. So if you're, and I may not fully understand the question, but so if I would put that sort of in the camp of almost concept testing or optimization. If you have an idea of a way to announce something internally at a company and you want to test that, yeah, I mean, we do that kind of stuff all the time. You basically would recruit people into the study. So they would be, enlisted to sign up. They'd be given a URL and a login to participate, given a time period to do it. And oftentimes with B2B audiences, we're a little bit more flexible. And one of the great benefits of asynchronous work is that you're not limited. You can give people a bigger window to complete their research tasks. So you can say, hey, employees, anytime between Tuesday and Thursday, we'd like you to go log in. You'll see a set of assignments on your dashboard. When you're ready to begin, just click on those. They'll be presented with, a concept. It could be a description of an announcement, or some other type. Could be a video, whatever you're planning to present internally. And then you would take them through a battery of questions about that concept. Now, One of the things that I think is important to understand is that when we design these studies, knowing that we're using Luminoso for part of our analysis, we know that what we're trying to do is generate language. We need language to understand what people are really thinking and feeling, oftentimes on a subconscious level, about whatever stimulus we're putting in front of them. So we will ask a number of open-ended questions, take them through a series of research tasks that might involve, choosing an abstract image to represent the feeling of an idea, a variety of approaches, but all of that is designed to have them write or, through their webcam video, tell us what they're thinking and feeling. We're capturing language that we can then upload to Luminoso, because the more we feed the AI, the better it becomes, the smarter it becomes, and the better able our analysts are to see trends in the data. So we'll ask a whole series of questions coming out of concept from a variety of different ways. Summarize the meaning of this. What kind of person, describe the person who would be really interested in this. What's the feeling or attitude of this? In a couple of paragraphs, describe the story that this is telling you. So we're trying to get them to reveal through their use of language what's inside the black box, which is going on inside their minds, because that's our fodder for analysis.
Yeah,
that's a whole other webinar, the connection between
it definitely is.
Cognition and language. I could go on for days. So, but yeah, that's.
No, it's good. And it ties into some of the other questions that we had in the chat. So I might be more selective with the other questions. But that, I think you've already touched on one of the questions about like insight differences between IDIs and group settings. You mentioned IDIs still kind of piping in at the end for observation. So that one kind of addressed, just glossing over a lot of questions in the chat. One is actually Luminoso specific, which as your CSM, no pressure. How easy or challenging was it to understand how to optimize Luminoso into your analytic process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I worked a lot with Kim. And we've worked with other text analytics packages, and we found Luminoso to suit our needs best. But I think we're using it differently, Kim, than a lot of your other clients use it. But it took some time, but I was committed to it because I really felt like this was, the future for us as a company, and where things ultimately should be headed for qualitative research. So. I don't know, Kim, we worked together for several months probably on, and what Kim helped me do is understand the best type of data and how to structure the data set for Luminoso to work really well. And then, since that time, we've incorporated it into our workflow. And basically the way we're using it now is we have almost kind of analytical modules that we know when we're going to do a driver's analysis, that in the asynchronous research, we're going to ask this battery of questions. Now those get tailored to the project, but we know what we need to, and how that analysis is going to be structured for drivers. We're currently working through the same thing. Kim's going to get a call for this. We've done this before, but we want to, make it a process and a workflow, a way to use Galaxy in a similar fashion. What are the asynchronous activities we need? How will that be analyzed? What's the data set that produces? How will that be analyzed? And how are we going to use it? So we're creating specific workflows that go from design to data export on our end, to analysis in Luminoso, all the way through to the report and how this gets visualized in terms of the data that ends up in our final deck to our client. So we're creating those workflows. I hope that answers the question. I don't know.
I hope so too, and I trust this person to circle back if I missed it. And okay, keeping conscious of time. I know folks are going to start dropping because we're at 9 minutes till your next meetings, everyone. This is I like this question a lot. What was your client reaction to the evolved qual approach you've ambitiously added to your approach? So I guess mostly client reactions to this.
Yeah, it's I mean, we have a wide range of clients, and we have those that are sort of all in on this, and others who, we still will do focus groups for. So, if a client comes to us and says, we really, our team really wants this to be, live in-person groups, we will do that for them. And so we're not, falling on a sword for this as a company. And so I guess it varies. It really varies. A lot of it, I will say, is driven, a reluctance to let go of the focus group is driven not by the insights team, but by the brand team. And particularly, I think coming out of the pandemic, what I'm hearing is those clients that want to get back out there on the road and do in-person qualitative research, it's usually the brand team that is just sort of hungry for, I want to sit behind the mirror and I want to hear my customer talk. And that's great. Again, that's a perfect use. I put that in sort of the empathy building camp, and I think that's a great use of focus groups still, and I would support that. But I think, most of the research people, the insights people, would prefer to be doing what we're doing. Because they don't have to get on a plane, first of all. But they also understand that it oftentimes is more efficient, it costs less, and it's more robust, and they can be more confident in the findings. And the insights folks tend to be, curious and interested in, what's new.
The questions are really starting to get rapid fire. 3 more still, and you have 5 minutes.
I'm happy to respond to anybody's question by email.
I love this. I see you, some of the clients, they're just dumping praise in, and I'm like, I love this. One question, and I would say not yet, because as the CSM, I see what you guys do. Are you using Luminoso to analyze session transcripts? And I'll add the appendage of, is that something that has crossed your mind?
Yeah, no, sorry, Kim, not. Yeah, I mean, our experience with Luminoso is, and you guys know better than I do, the full capabilities, but when we do our asynchronous work, it tends to generate documents, cells of data that are maybe at most a few paragraphs of text. And that a few paragraphs or less broken up are great for Luminoso. When we get into full transcripts of like a 1-hour IDI, we're using coding software. If you're familiar with NVivo, we're using NVivo. But we're also exploring some other coding software that has more robust AI capabilities. And we're on the hunt. If anybody out there knows of anything, let me know. What we do there is, we have a team of analysts who are qualitative coders, and they're excellent at developing, really robust insights from qual transcripts. So we're using different platforms for different tools. We've got Luminoso sort of bucketed in a very specific place for specific analytical approaches. We use other platforms for other things. And also our asynchronous collection platform, AHA, has a pretty good analytical suite too for tagging and doing some other analytical processes within the platform itself. So we're using all 3 of those, depending on what we need.
What they're designed for. Don't use a screwdriver to do hammering.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. I'm going to give you the long question first. So I'm going to scroll through it. What are some of the limitations of using an asynchronous approach versus online IDIs? In other words, when we should not be using this new approach compared to IDIs. I would expect asynchronous approach to limit our ability to explore and dig deeper since it's not live.
Yep, and that's absolutely right. And so if you're at the front end of a project, you're still exploring themes, you want that flexibility that form of qual offers. To explore themes that are unanticipated, then absolutely, I think IDIs are great for that. So again, as I talked about earlier, I mean, if you're in that sort of immersion stage, and I think groups can be good for that situation too, where you're just trying to get your feet wet, just trying to understand, what where true north is to some extent, and what questions you should be asking. That I think traditional forums are great for that. And so that flexibility is really what what we would refer to as live work really affords you. So absolutely.
All right, and last question that is currently in the question list is related to ROI and time to insights. So can you compare the ROI or time to insight using digital asynchronous analytics tools available today?
Yeah, so it's another great question. I mean, again, as a methodologist, one of the things that always drove me crazy about the focus group ritual was the post-group debrief, because I'm an analyst as well as a moderator, and I always felt like, how are we expected to have all the answers where you've just conducted 6 or 8 groups, and then immediately we go into a 1-hour conversation with the client, and everybody walks away, and that's kind of it. And I understand why that happens, and I understand the impulse to do it, but it always bothered me that there was no time for analysis and no time for thought. And analytically, the time's about the same for us. Typically, the way we operate, given that we operate in an agile world now, is we deliver a quick top line, what we call a strategic story, 1 week after the close of field work. And the way that we do that is, regardless of whether we're doing live work or asynchronous qual, we flag certain what we call keyhole measures. These are things that we know, questions we're asking, tasks within the asynchronous work that are directly related to the study objectives, and we know we can go to those first to structure the data set, begin our analysis, and give us a quick glimpse of what's going on. So we basically deliver that strategic story a week out, and we say, hey, client, here is the direction we're heading in. What do you think? What questions do you have about this? And then anywhere from a week to 2 weeks after that, we deliver the full final analysis. And we would do that even with a fully live qualitative project. We really are trying to deliver a quick hit top line very quickly, but then take our time and do the analysis, apply the rigor in a way that we should be, frankly, if we're going to be accurate and produce insights that our clients can have confidence in. 2 minutes left, Kim.
2 minutes, 1 minute left, 60-second final countdown. We actually cleared out all the questions in the queue. So congratulations, Jim, on getting that down. Thank you, Satoshi, for hosting the first half and giving us space for questions at the end. So with that, I will do the fastest wrap up I've ever done. You covered the questions. If you would like to contact either Jim at RealityCheck, the RealityCheck team, or Luminoso, we'll send out that contact information after the recording, as well as the recording. If you want to watch our other content, we'll be putting out more. It's going to go on our YouTube channel, so you can look up Luminoso on YouTube. And I think that was the fastest way I could go through it. November should be good on sentiment. December should be good. It's going to be talking about integrating AI into your business operations with our CEO. So Jeff will make an appearance. Just good stuff lined up. Thank you so much, Jim, for doing this with us. It's always
thank you guys. It was fun. It was fun. I love partnering with you guys.
All right. Thanks, Jim, and thanks everyone for attending.
Yep. Thank you all. Yep. Appreciate it.